Today, we will be looking at 14 horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. Each story stands on its own, exposing how a single misstep, misjudgment, or stroke of bad luck deep underground can unleash devastating consequences. As always, viewer discretion is advised. September 5th, 1988. The Florida sun had already set when Mark Happe and 21-year-old Debbie Eves approached Orange Grove Sink in Suwannee County for what would be their third and final dive of the day. At 10:11 p.m., the darkness above ground mirrored the permanent blackness that awaited them in the underwater cave system below. Mark had earned his basic cave certification just 4 months earlier in May, while Debbie had received hers even more recently on July 3rd. Their certifications represented the entry level of cave diving training designed to prepare divers for simple, straightforward cave penetrations under ideal conditions. Basic cave certification assumes single-tank diving in well-lit, easily navigated cave systems with minimal complexity and maximum safety margins. Orange Grove Sink presented challenges far beyond the scope of basic cave training. The cave system featured complex passages, multiple route options, and conditions that could deteriorate rapidly when sediment got disturbed. The site demanded the advanced skills and experience that come only with extensive cave diving practice and higher levels of certification. For divers with basic cave credentials, Orange Grove Sink represented territory they simply weren't prepared to handle safely. Debbie's experience level made the situation even more precarious. Despite her recent certification, she had logged only 10 cave dives total. Adding to the risk factors, Debbie was diving with rental gear instead of the familiar equipment that experienced cave divers rely upon. Rental equipment means unfamiliar controls, different buoyancy characteristics, and gear configurations that haven't been tested through repeated use. When the pair discussed their dive plans with their instructor and other experienced cave divers, the response was unanimous and urgent. Multiple experienced voices warned them that they were not ready for Orange Grove Sink. The warnings came from divers who had seen accidents happen when inexperienced cavers push beyond their training limits. Despite these clear warnings from knowledgeable sources, the pair decided to proceed with their dive plan. Their decision to ignore expert advice represented a critical failure in judgment that cave diving simply doesn't forgive. Their dive plan involved heading toward Challenge Sink, another cave feature accessible through Orange Grove Sink's underwater passages. However, they agreed to turn back if silting occurred. The plan showed some safety awareness, but it also revealed their limited understanding of cave diving realities. Another critical element of their dive plan revealed additional poor judgment. They knew that Debbie's primary light would not last for the duration of their planned dive. To address this known deficiency, they brought a UK 1200 backup light to use when Debbie's primary light failed. However, this plan meant they would be conducting a light exchange in an underwater cave environment, a procedure that requires careful coordination and can create dangerous situations for inexperienced divers. Light exchanges should be practiced procedures, not improvised solutions to inadequate planning. The pair entered Orange Grove Sink and began their penetration into the cave system. The initial portion of their dive proceeded according to plan, as they followed the main guideline deeper into the underwater passages. They proceeded past the halfway point of their planned route, a significant penetration into the cave system that placed them far from the safety of open water. At this distance from the entrance, any emergency would require substantial time and distance to resolve, while their air supplies would be partially consumed from the inbound journey. As predicted by their dive plan, silting began to occur. The disturbance of sediment in cave passages can happen from diver movement, equipment contact with cave walls, or changes in water flow. Once stirred up, fine sediment can remain suspended in the water column for extended periods, reducing visibility and making navigation extremely challenging. Following their predetermined plan, Mark and Debbie turned back when silting occurred. However, their return journey would present challenges that their basic training and minimal experience hadn't prepared them to handle. During their retreat from the cave system, Debbie's primary light expired as anticipated. The transition to their backup UK 1200 light should have been a simple equipment exchange, but the procedure created unexpected complications. During the light exchange process, the pair drifted away from their guideline. This seemingly minor navigational error represented the beginning of a deadly chain of events. With their backup light functioning, Mark and Debbie turned their attention to re-establishing contact with their navigation guideline. They were able to locate a line and regain what they believed to be their original route out of the cave system. However, the line they found was not the same guideline they had been following on their inbound journey. Cave systems often contain multiple guidelines that serve different routes or connect various sections of the underground passages. These different lines can appear identical to inexperienced divers, creating opportunities for dangerous navigation errors. The pair followed this incorrect guideline for some time before realizing their mistake. The passages they were seeing didn't match their memory of the inbound route, and the expected landmarks weren't appearing. When they recognized that they were following the wrong guideline, Mark and Debbie exchanged information using a slate, an underwater writing board that allows divers to communicate complex information when voice communication is impossible. The slate note likely confirmed their shared realization that they were not on the correct exit route. They turned around and began retracing their path along the incorrect guideline, hoping to find their original route back to the cave entrance. However, their movement through the cave system had continued to stir up sediment, and visibility conditions were continuing to deteriorate around them. At this critical moment, Debbie spotted another guideline. Debbie made the decision to leave their current line and swim toward this newly discovered guideline. The decision to abandon a known guideline to pursue another line violated fundamental cave diving safety principles. Experienced cave divers maintain contact with guidelines at all times and never abandon a known line without absolute certainty about their navigation. Cave systems can have multiple lines crossing or running parallel to each other, creating complex navigation puzzles for experienced divers and deadly confusion for those without adequate training. As Debbie swam toward the other guideline, the silting that had been building throughout their dive reached critical levels. Visibility dropped to near zero, creating conditions where divers can become completely disoriented even when they're only feet apart. In zero visibility conditions, maintaining contact with diving partners becomes extremely difficult. Mark attempted to maintain contact with Debbie, but the silted-out conditions made it impossible to see her movements. He conducted a line search, a standard cave diving procedure for locating missing divers that involves systematically searching along guidelines while maintaining navigation reference. However, his search efforts failed to locate Debbie in the zero visibility conditions. Faced with deteriorating conditions, a missing dive partner, and his own need to exit the cave before his air supply became critically low, Mark made the difficult decision to begin his own exit from the cave system. He retraced his path along the incorrect guideline until he was able to relocate their original guideline, then followed it back to the cave entrance. He exited successfully and contacted the authorities. Somewhere in the silted-out passages of Orange Grove Sink, Debbie remained lost in zero visibility conditions. Her decision to abandon the known guideline in pursuit of another line had separated her from any reliable navigation reference. Without a continuous guideline to guide her exit, she faced the cave diver's worst nightmare, being lost in an underwater cave system with limited air supply and no clear path to safety. The sediment that had reduced visibility to zero would eventually settle, but this process takes time that Debbie's air supply couldn't provide. Even if visibility had returned, she would still face the challenge of locating a guideline that could lead her back to the cave entrance. A team of experienced rescue divers that were well aware of this particular cave and its complex systems gathered at the scene. They descended down with their advanced diving equipment and made a thorough search. They had made a guess about Debbie's whereabouts after gathering all the information from her diving partner, Mark. They followed the routes taken and were eventually able to locate Debbie's lifeless body floating deep inside the cave. The sediment had settled, however, her air supply had run out. The analysis of this tragedy revealed multiple contributing factors that had combined to create fatal conditions. Debbie and Mark had been diving well above their training level by attempting Orange Grove Sink with only basic cave certification. Their loss of the continuous guideline during the light exchange represented the critical error that transformed a manageable situation into a fatal emergency. Cave diving safety depends absolutely on maintaining contact with navigation guidelines, and even brief separations from these lifelines can create deadly situations for inexperienced divers. After Mark's successful navigation and exit from the cave system, rescue personnel were able to understand what had happened and were able to begin recovery operations for Debbie. His survival provided crucial information about the sequence of events that had led to the separation and loss of his diving partner. July 19, 1988. The Ottawa River near the Quebec border was hosting what should have been a routine cave diving camp organized by the Speleological Society of Quebec. For 2 weeks, experienced cave divers had been exploring the crystal-clear springs scattered across the river's islands, mapping underwater passages. Among the participants were 37-year-old Jean Lamarre and his diving partner, Luc Leblanc, both seasoned cave divers who understood the unique dangers of exploring flooded underground passages. Lamarre was the kind of diver other people looked up to, methodical, safety-conscious, and experienced enough to know that complacency kills in the underwater cave environment. On that day, Lamarre and Leblanc approached one of the springs they had been systematically exploring throughout the camp. The entrance appeared deceptively simple, just a small surface pool nestled among the rocks of a river island. But beneath that innocent-looking water lay a complex underwater cave system. The two divers entered the water and began their descent into the flooded passage. The underwater environment they entered was both beautiful and terrifying. A submerged tunnel approximately 6.5 feet, 2 meters high, and 16 feet, 5 meters wide, with visibility limited by sediment stirred up from previous dives. The maximum depth reached about 20 feet, 6 meters below the surface. Deep enough that emergency ascent to the surface was impossible due to the rock ceiling above. They swam upstream into the cave system, methodically laying guideline as they progressed. This thin rope would be their lifeline back to the surface, the only navigation aid in an environment where wrong turns are fatal, and getting lost means certain death. Every cave diver knows the golden rule: always maintain contact with your guideline, and always have enough air to return to the entrance. At 295 feet, 90 meters into the cave system, Lamarre and Leblanc reached their predetermined turnaround point. This wasn't arbitrary. Experienced cave divers follow strict air consumption rules, never using more than 1/3 of their air supply for the inward journey. This leaves 1/3 for the return trip and 1/3 for emergencies. As they prepared to turn back, Lamarre discovered a minor leak in one of his regulators and notified him. The two divers returned to the surface pool, where Lamarre dismantled and cleaned his regulator, standard procedure for dealing with equipment issues during technical diving. After ensuring his gear was functioning properly, they re-entered the cave to conduct a survey of the 295-foot, 90-meter passage they had just explored. This second dive should have been routine, almost boring compared to their initial exploration. At the end of their guideline, 295 feet, 90 meters from the surface in safety, Lamarre signaled to Leblanc to begin their exit from the cave. This was standard protocol. The dive leader initiates the return journey, and both divers follow the guideline back to the entrance together. Nothing about this moment suggested the tragedy about to unfold. Leblanc experienced a minor entanglement with the guideline, the kind of small equipment issue that every cave diver deals with regularly. It took him only moments to sort out the problem, but when he looked around in the murky water, he couldn't tell if Lamarre was ahead of him or behind him. Visibility in the cave was poor, and the sediment stirred up by their movements had reduced their visual range to just a few feet. Assuming Lamarre had gone ahead as planned, Leblanc followed the guideline toward the cave entrance. The return journey felt normal. The same narrow passage, the same limited visibility, the same methodical progression back toward daylight and safety. There was no reason to suspect anything was wrong until he reached the surface pool and realized he was alone. When Leblanc surfaced in the entrance pool and found no sign of his diving partner, every cave diver's worst nightmare began unfolding. Lamarre should have been there waiting, discussing the dive, checking equipment, preparing for their next exploration. Instead, Leblanc found himself alone with the terrifying realization that his experienced partner was still somewhere in the flooded cave below. Without hesitation, Leblanc re-entered the cave, following the guideline back through 295 feet, 90 meters of underwater passage to search for Lamari. The return journey that had taken minutes during their normal exit now felt like hours as LeBlanc fought growing panic and dwindling air supplies. At the end of their survey line, LeBlanc made the discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Jean Lamari was floating motionless in the water, his 37-year-old body suspended in the cave passage where he had spent years safely exploring similar environments. He was clearly dead, his regulator no longer in his mouth, though his face mask remained properly positioned. Most disturbing was the blood visible on Lamari's mask, evidence that something had gone catastrophically wrong in the final moments of his life. This wasn't equipment failure or navigation error. This was a medical emergency that had occurred in the worst possible location. LeBlanc faced a decision that no diver should ever have to make. His air supply was running dangerously low after the extended search, and he was now 295 feet, 90 meters from the surface with a deceased partner who couldn't help with his own rescue. Cave diving protocol demanded that he save himself rather than risk a second fatality attempting a recovery he wasn't equipped to complete. He managed to move Lamari's body partway toward the entrance before his air supply forced him to make the agonizing decision to leave his partner's body in the cave and surface alone. The swim back to the entrance pool, knowing he was abandoning Lamari in the underwater darkness, represented a psychological trauma that would stay with LeBlanc forever. Professional recovery divers returned to the cave the following day with specialized equipment and fresh air supplies to retrieve Lamari's body. Their investigation revealed details that made the tragedy even more mysterious and disturbing. Lamari's regulators were functioning perfectly when tested by the recovery team. His air tanks still contained breathable air. He hadn't run out of gas or experienced equipment failure. His diving gear was in proper working order, and there were no signs of entanglement or navigation errors that might have caused panic. Dr. K. David Sawatsky's subsequent analysis suggested two possible medical explanations for Lamari's death. The blood on his mask indicated he may have suffered a severe nosebleed that caused suffocation when combined with the regulator being out of his mouth. Alternatively, he might have experienced a catastrophic cardiovascular event, a ruptured aneurysm, or sudden cardiac arrhythmia that caused immediate unconsciousness. What made Lamari's death so terrifying for the cave diving community was its randomness. This wasn't a case of inexperience, equipment failure, or poor judgment. A healthy, experienced diver had suffered a medical emergency in an environment where even minor problems become fatal. In open water, a nosebleed is an inconvenience. A brief cardiac irregularity might cause dizziness. But 295 feet, 90 meters inside a flooded cave, any medical issue that compromises your ability to breathe or think clearly becomes an immediate death sentence. There's no emergency ascent, no buddy breathing to the surface, no calling for help. For LeBlanc, the psychological trauma of finding his partner's body in that underwater tomb, then being forced to leave him there, represented a burden that goes far beyond normal diving risks. Jean Lamari's death proved that sometimes, in the most hostile environments on Earth, experience and preparation aren't enough. Sometimes the cave wins regardless of how well you've prepared for the dive, and sometimes the greatest danger isn't the one you can see coming. July 3rd, 2021. Sharp's Cave in Virginia stretched like a black mouth into the mountainside. 40-year-old Arlen checked his watch one final time before stepping into the darkness with his 19-year-old daughter Lexi beside him. It was 3 p.m. on a warm summer afternoon. The plan seemed simple enough: explore the cave system and find the famous waterfall that other cavers had described. What could go wrong on a basic cave tour? Everything. Arlen and Lexi were what experienced cavers call tourist cavers, people drawn to underground exploration without proper training or equipment. They carried basic flashlights instead of proper cave lighting systems. No helmets protected their heads from low-hanging rocks. Their clothing was completely wrong for the cave's cold, wet environment. But they were excited. The idea of discovering an underground waterfall felt like the adventure of a lifetime. They had heard other visitors talking about the stunning formation deep within the cave system, and curiosity got the better of them. Sharp's Cave wasn't just any cave system. It was a complex maze of passages, rooms, and dead ends. The cave stretched for miles underground, with multiple levels and interconnected chambers that created a three-dimensional puzzle. The waterfall they were seeking wasn't marked on any tourist map. It required navigating through sections with names like Catfish Hall, areas where passages split in multiple directions and every tunnel looked identical. The cave had already claimed its share of victims over the years. Local rescue teams knew it well as a place where overconfident explorers regularly got themselves into trouble. The cave formations created natural traps where people could become disoriented within minutes of leaving the main passage. As father and daughter moved deeper into the cave, their cheap flashlights began to dim. The batteries were dying faster than expected in the cold, damp air. Cave environments are notorious for draining battery power quickly due to the constant humidity and temperature changes. But they pressed on, determined to find that waterfall. The deeper they went, the more complex the cave became. Side passages branched off in every direction. Some led to beautiful formations and hidden chambers. Others ended in dead ends or dangerous drops. Without a map or proper navigation skills, they were essentially playing Russian roulette with their lives. Hours passed. The passages seemed to multiply around them. Every turn led to another choice, left or right, up or down. They tried to remember their route back, but in the darkness, every rock formation looked the same. The cave walls all had similar textures and colors, making it impossible to distinguish one area from another. By 6 p.m., they were completely lost. The cave temperature was a constant 54 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 degrees Celsius. Without proper clothing, hypothermia became a real threat. Their inadequate lights were failing, plunging them deeper into a world of absolute darkness. Panic began to set in. Arlen tried to stay calm for his daughter's sake, but internally he was fighting growing terror. They had no backup lights, no emergency supplies, no way to signal for help. Worse yet, nobody above ground knew exactly where in the cave they had planned to go. They wandered for hours, calling out for help, but sound travels strangely in cave systems. Sometimes voices echo for miles through limestone corridors. Other times, they're swallowed completely by the rock formations, making it impossible for rescuers to locate the source. As the hours dragged on, their situation became increasingly desperate. Dehydration was setting in. Their bodies were burning through energy reserves trying to stay warm. The psychological stress of being trapped in complete darkness was taking its toll on both father and daughter. Meanwhile, above ground, Arlen's two younger children, aged 10 and 16, were getting worried. Their father had promised to be back by evening for a family barbecue planned for the 4th of July holiday. When 11:30 p.m. arrived with no sign of their family, the teenagers made a decision. They called 911. The 911 dispatcher initially treated it as a routine missing persons report. But when the teenagers explained that their father and sister had been exploring a cave system and were now 8 hours overdue, the call was immediately escalated to emergency status. The emergency call triggered a massive response. The Shavers Fork Fire Rescue Team was first to arrive, but they quickly realized this wasn't a job for regular firefighters. Cave rescue requires specialized training, equipment, and knowledge that most emergency responders don't possess. Caves present unique challenges: unstable rock formations, flooding risks, hypothermia dangers, and navigation complexities that can kill rescuers as easily as victims. Virginia State Police contacted Jennifer Boyle of the Eastern Region National Cave Rescue Commission. Boyle was an experienced cave rescue specialist who had participated in dozens of underground emergencies over the years. But even she had never been inside Sharp's Cave before, which would make the rescue exponentially more difficult. Boyle understood the urgency. After 12 hours in a cave environment, hypothermia could easily kill someone wearing inappropriate clothing. She gathered her team, her husband and 2 children, who were also trained in cave rescue, and headed for the cave entrance with emergency equipment. At 1:30 a.m. on July 4th, Boyle's team entered the cave for what's called a hasty search, a quick reconnaissance to locate the missing cavers before hypothermia could kill them. They carried powerful LED lighting systems, communication equipment, and emergency medical supplies. But Sharp's cave had other plans. Even with proper equipment and training, Boyle's team couldn't locate the waterfall area where Arlen and Lexi were believed to be trapped. The cave system was too complex, with too many branching passages and hidden chambers. They searched the most obvious routes first, but came up empty. The clock was ticking. Every hour that passed increased the likelihood that the missing cavers would succumb to hypothermia or dehydration. Cave environments are unforgiving. They don't care about your experience level or good intentions. After 2 hours of searching, Boyle made the difficult decision to exit and call for massive reinforcements. This rescue was going to require a coordinated effort involving multiple teams and specialized equipment. By 8:30 a.m., approximately 40 cave rescue specialists were converging on Sharp's cave. This represented one of the largest cave rescue operations in Virginia's history. Teams came from multiple counties, bringing specialized equipment including communication systems, warming gear, medical supplies, and powerful lighting systems. The rescue operation was like a military campaign. Teams were assigned different sections of the cave. Communication lines were run from the surface deep into the cave system, using field telephones that could work in the underground environment. Every passage had to be methodically searched and marked to prevent teams from covering the same ground twice. Around 10 a.m., Christopher Spence and Mystic Miller formed a search team focused on an area called Catfish Hall. This section of the cave had been overlooked in earlier searches because it seemed too difficult for inexperienced cave explorers to reach. They were wrong. Deep in Catfish Hall, Spence and Miller made a shocking discovery that left them stunned. 2 dark shadow-like figures huddled together at the corner. After looking closely with their flashlights, they realized it was Arlen and Lexi. Both were alive, but in serious trouble. They had been trapped in the cave for 19 hours. Their bodies were shaking uncontrollably from hypothermia. Their cheap flashlights had died hours earlier, leaving them in complete darkness. They were dehydrated, exhausted, and terrified. But they were alive. Spence and Miller immediately began emergency treatment. They shared warm clothing, food, and water with the hypothermic pair. Most importantly, they provided proper cave lights that would guide them safely out of the maze. The journey back to the surface took several more hours. Arlen and Lexi had to be carefully guided through passages they never would have navigated alone. Every step had to be planned to prevent further injury or exhaustion. When they finally emerged into daylight, both father and daughter were suffering from mild hypothermia and severe dehydration. But they were alive and uninjured. What made this story remarkable wasn't just the successful rescue. It was what happened afterward. Despite their terrifying ordeal, Arlen and Lexi hadn't lost their fascination with caving. Instead of being traumatized by the experience, they wanted to learn how to do it properly. Mystic Miller, one of their rescuers, invited them to join the Greenbrier Grotto, a local caving organization that teaches proper techniques, safety procedures, and cave conservation. Rather than being banned from caves after their mistake, they were welcomed into a community that would teach them how to explore safely. The morning of September 11th, 2002, began like countless others in Hawaii's rural fern forest subdivision. 3 hunters gathered their gear in the pre-dawn darkness, checking their headlamps, backup batteries, and emergency supplies one final time. Their destination was well known among locals: the Captain's Trail, a winding path that led through dense forest toward the Pu'u eruption area. This wasn't their first time navigating these trails, but Hawaii's landscape held secrets that even experienced outdoorsmen couldn't always predict. The path wound through thick vegetation, past towering tree ferns. Everything appeared normal at first, but somewhere along their route, the hunters made a fateful decision. Whether drawn by promising tracks or simply seeking to explore unfamiliar territory, they ventured away from the established trail. In Hawaii's volcanic landscape, this seemingly innocent choice would prove more dangerous than they could have imagined. The island's unique geology creates a labyrinthine network of lava tubes, hollow tunnels formed when the surface of flowing lava cools and hardens, while the molten rock beneath continues to flow. These tubes can extend for kilometers underground, creating vast subterranean mazes. When the hunters discovered what appeared to be a cave entrance, their curiosity overcame their caution. The opening seemed manageable, large enough to explore safely. What the hunters couldn't have known was that they were entering one of Hawaii's most complex lava tube networks. These weren't simple caves with clear entry and exit points, but interconnected tunnels that twisted and branched like underground highways. Some passages led deeper into the mountain, others connected to different tube systems entirely. Without proper mapping equipment or extensive knowledge of the specific network, navigation became increasingly difficult. As hours passed, their initial excitement turned to concern, then to genuine worry. The passages all began to look similar in the harsh light of their headlamps. Each turn seemed to lead to another identical tunnel, and attempts to retrace their steps only led to more confusion. In the maze-like passages, they got lost. Meanwhile, above ground, family members grew increasingly anxious as the hunters failed to return at their expected time. The families knew the hunters were experienced, but they also understood the unique dangers of Hawaii's volcanic terrain. The call to emergency services came as darkness fell across the fern forest area. The Hawaii County Fire Department received the report of 3 missing hunters last seen heading toward the Captain's Trail area. This wasn't an unusual call for the department. Search and rescue operations in Hawaii's challenging terrain were unfortunately common occurrences. Firefighter Brent Matsuda received the emergency call at his station. At 41 years old, he was an experienced member of the Hawaii County Fire Department, with years of training in the technical rescue operations. Matsuda had participated in numerous search and rescue missions across the Big Island's diverse and often treacherous landscape. He understood the unique challenges posed by volcanic terrain, dense vegetation, and the network of lava tubes that honeycomb the island's interior. As part of the search team, Matsuda knew time was critical. In Hawaii's environment, missing persons faced multiple threats: dehydration, hypothermia in underground spaces, falls into hidden pits, and simple disorientation in dense forest. The volcanic landscape added another layer of complexity: unstable ground, hidden caverns, and the constant possibility of encountering active volcanic activity. The search began at first light on the morning of September 12th. Multiple teams spread out from the Captain's Trail, following different possible routes the hunters might have taken. The vegetation was incredibly dense, creating what locals called green tunnels, where rescuers had to push through walls of ferns, vines, and undergrowth. In many areas, the foliage was so thick that searchers literally walked on top of it, never touching the actual ground beneath. This was precisely the condition that made Hawaii's volcanic terrain so dangerous. The luxuriant plant growth created what appeared to be solid ground, but was actually a network of vegetation suspended over hidden gaps, caves, and pits. Experienced locals knew to watch for dark spots in the vegetation, areas where the normal pattern of plant growth was interrupted, potentially indicating a hidden opening beneath. Around 10 a.m., Matsuda was working his way through particularly dense vegetation when he encountered what appeared to be solid ground covered with native ferns. The moment his weight shifted onto what he believed was solid foliage, everything changed. The ferns and undergrowth gave way beneath him, revealing a hidden opening that had been completely camouflaged by the plant cover. The opening measured approximately 1.5 by 2.4 meters, 5 by 8 feet, large enough to be dangerous, but small enough to be easily concealed by the thick vegetation. Matsuda plummeted into darkness, falling approximately 30 meters down, 100 feet, into one of Hawaii's unusually large lava tubes. The fall was catastrophic, a straight drop through complete darkness into the unknown. His training had prepared him for many scenarios, but nothing could have prepared him for this sudden, violent descent into the volcanic underworld. The impact at the bottom of the tube was severe. Matsuda's protective equipment his helmet and backpack, absorbed some of the tremendous force, but the injuries were still life-threatening. He suffered broken ribs that made breathing difficult and painful. Vertebrae in his spine were damaged, threatening potential paralysis. Internal injuries affected his liver and kidneys, organs critical to his survival. Above ground, Matsuda's fellow firefighters heard his cry and immediately recognized the sound of someone falling into a hidden pit. This type of accident was all too familiar to Hawaii's rescue personnel. The thick vegetation that made the island so beautiful also created countless hidden dangers for anyone working in the forest. The rescue operation shifted from searching for the missing hunters to saving one of their own. Matsuda was seriously injured at the bottom of the lava tube. The smooth volcanic walls made climbing impossible without equipment, and his injuries prevented any significant movement. Fellow firefighters quickly assembled rope rescue equipment and began the complex process of extracting Matsuda from the deep pit. The opening was barely large enough to allow equipment and personnel to be lowered down, and the smooth walls of the lava tube provided few anchor points for securing ropes. The extraction required precise coordination and extensive technical expertise. Matsuda had to be carefully secured in a rescue harness without aggravating his spinal injuries. Once brought to the surface, Matsuda was immediately prepared for emergency medical evacuation. A helicopter was called to transport him to the nearest hospital capable of handling his severe injuries. The remote location of the accident made ground transportation impossible, and his condition was too critical for any delays. Ironically, while the rescue community worked frantically to save Matsuda, the original mission continued with renewed urgency. The remaining search teams pressed forward with their hunt for the 3 missing men, now understanding firsthand just how dangerous the terrain had become. The accident had revealed the hidden network of lava tubes beneath their feet, providing crucial insight into where the hunters might have disappeared. The rescue teams split into smaller groups, each taking different approaches to the underground search. They analyzed the terrain, looking for other potential cave entrances that might connect to the same lava tube system where Matsuda had fallen. The hunters had been missing for over 24 hours now, and time was running critically short. Using their knowledge of the local geology and the newly discovered tube system, the teams made educated predictions about the most likely routes the hunters could have taken underground. They systematically checked multiple cave openings, calling into the darkness and listening carefully for any response. Then, breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. One of the search team members, working methodically through a section of tubes several hundred meters from Matsuda's accident site, heard something that made him freeze in place. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably human. Voices echoing through the volcanic corridors. Following the sound deeper into the tube system, the rescuer navigated carefully through the smooth-walled passages. The voices grew stronger and eventually led him to the 3 missing hunters. They were huddled together in a wider section of the lava tube, suffering from mild hypothermia and completely without functioning lights, but alive. The hunters had spent nearly 24 hours lost in the labyrinthine system, their ordeal lasting through the night in the constant 18 degrees Celsius temperature of the tubes. Without functioning lights and with inadequate insulation, their body temperatures had dropped below normal levels, causing the confusion and sluggish thinking characteristic of hypothermia. But they were conscious and able to walk with assistance. The rescue team carefully guided them through the complex underground passages back to the surface. They emerged into daylight tired, cold, and shaken by their underground ordeal, but requiring no emergency medical treatment beyond warming and rehydration. Back at the hospital, doctors confirmed the extent of Matsuda's injuries. The broken ribs had punctured tissue and made breathing difficult. The spinal injuries required immediate stabilization to prevent paralysis. The internal damage to his liver and kidneys threatened his body's ability to process toxins and maintain essential functions. He was listed in critical but stable condition, though doctors were optimistic about his chances for recovery. In the days that followed, Matsuda did in fact recover fully. Tracy Harrison had no idea that August 10th, the day she was born, was potentially the day she might die. What began as plans to celebrate her upcoming 39th birthday in Missouri's Martin Cave turned into a devastating tragedy. Martin Cave was privately owned, but accessible to visitors, located in the rolling hills characteristic of Missouri's Ozark region. The Current River, a national scenic riverway, flowed through the area, its clear waters sparkling as they passed beneath the thick forest. This region was famous for its many caves, formed by the unique karst landscape that Missouri is known for. To reach the entrance of Martin Cave, travelers would follow the river, as it provided one of the main routes to the cave's entrance, winding through the natural beauty of the surroundings. The river's path through this rugged, cave-filled area was a key way to access the cave and explore the landscape. Tracy and her friends used this cave as their party venue. The privately owned cave offered complete privacy and natural air conditioning from Missouri's blazing summer heat. The constant underground temperature of around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, around 16 degrees Celsius, was perfect relief from the oppressive humidity outside. This wasn't a planned caving expedition. The group brought coolers, snacks, beverages, and portable speakers for an underground birthday party. They wanted something unique and memorable, and the cave's natural acoustics seemed perfect for their celebration. The group entered the cave using flashlights and battery-powered lanterns. They ventured about 228 meters, 750 feet, into the system until they found a wider chamber suitable for their party setup. The limestone walls created impressive acoustics that amplified their music and conversations. As they unpacked supplies and set up their celebration, the mood was festive and relaxed. The novelty of partying underground added excitement to the gathering. Music played from speakers while they arranged their food and drinks in the underground chamber. During the setup, Tracy decided to head back toward the cave entrance alone. Perhaps she needed something from their vehicles, or maybe the underground environment was making her uncomfortable. Whatever her reason, she made a fatal mistake. She left without taking any light source. Her friends were busy setting up the party, music playing and conversations flowing. In the energetic atmosphere, nobody immediately noticed her departure. When they did realize she was gone, they assumed she had taken a flashlight and was safely making her way back to the entrance. Cave darkness is absolute. Unlike outdoor nighttime, where some light exists, caves offer complete blackness. Without illumination, navigation becomes impossible, and familiar passages turn deadly. Tracy attempted to navigate back through the cave system in total darkness. The limestone floor was uneven and treacherous. As Tracy attempted to move across the cave system in complete darkness, she lost her footing on the uneven limestone floor. She slipped, her foot catching on a stone protrusion, and began tumbling through the darkness. What Tracy couldn't see, and what made her fall catastrophic, was that she had stumbled directly into one of the most dangerous features of Martin Cave, an 11-foot, around 3.4 meters, vertical drop-off. This section of the cave required careful navigation, even with proper lighting, as the limestone floor suddenly disappeared into a lower chamber. Her slip had sent her tumbling over the edge of this precipice. The fall was devastating. 11 feet onto solid limestone was more than enough to cause severe trauma. Tracy went down, striking the rocky floor below with crushing force. The sound of her fall cut through the party atmosphere. The hollow crash of her body hitting limestone echoed off the cave walls, instantly silencing the celebration. Music stopped, conversations ceased, and everyone froze as the terrible sound reverberated through the passages. They abandoned their party setup and frantically searched for the source of the sound. When they found Tracy at the base of the drop-off, the scene was nightmarish. She lay unconscious on the limestone floor with severe head trauma. Most alarmingly, she was bleeding from her ears, a sign of significant brain injury and possible skull fracture. Her friends immediately recognized the gravity. Head injuries of this magnitude required immediate medical attention, but they were deep underground with no cell service. The party supplies that had seemed important moments before were forgotten as they faced a life-threatening emergency. One person remained with Tracy, while others rushed to the cave entrance to summon help. The jovial party atmosphere had become panic and desperation as they realized how unprepared they were for this emergency. The call reached the National Park Service as the cave was in the Current River corridor, Ranger Kelly Knutson received the report and understood the complexity immediately. Knutson radioed for additional help from other rangers and requested an ambulance. However, standard ambulances would be useless until Tracy could be evacuated from the cave system. As an emergency medical technician, Knutson knew time was critical with severe head trauma. The bleeding from Tracy's ears indicated potentially life-threatening brain injuries that could worsen rapidly. Every minute reduced her chances of recovery. Knutson responded by boat via the current river to reach the area quickly. The waterway now served as a crucial emergency highway. Tracy's friends who had stayed on the surface guided him to the cave entrance. Upon arrival, Knutson organized the rescue operation. Additional rangers and park personnel were bringing specialized cave rescue equipment and medical supplies. The narrow entrance in 228 meters, 750 feet, distance to the victim, presented significant logistical challenges. Knutson entered the cave system following the route Tracy's friends had marked. The contrast was stark. Party supplies scattered throughout the passage while he carried life-saving medical equipment. Empty coolers, abandoned snacks, and a silent speaker served as grim reminders of how quickly celebration had turned to tragedy. When Knutson reached Tracy, her condition was grave. She remained unconscious, still bleeding from her ears. He immediately began administering oxygen and conducting a preliminary injury assessment. The long fall onto solid limestone had clearly caused severe head trauma, and possible spinal injuries meant any movement had to be carefully controlled. Knutson directed Tracy's friends to keep her completely still while he radioed for additional medical personnel. The underground environment complicated every aspect of emergency care. Radio communications were limited. Lighting was inadequate for proper medical assessment, and the patient needed transport through narrow, uneven passages. The rescue required careful orchestration between multiple teams. Rangers and park personnel established an evacuation route from Tracy's location to the cave entrance. They brought additional lighting, medical equipment, and specialized stretchers designed for cave rescues. Preparing Tracy for transport was painstaking. Her potential spinal injuries required careful securing to a backboard before any movement. In the confined cave passage, this procedure was significantly more complex than on the surface. Every action had to be deliberate and coordinated to avoid additional trauma. Cave evacuation required multiple personnel working in relays. The narrow passages and uneven terrain made traditional stretcher carrying impossible. Rescue personnel carefully passed her from team to team, maintaining spinal immobilization throughout. As Tracy reached the cave entrance, the next rescue phase was already in motion. Knutson had coordinated helicopter transport to advanced medical facilities. However, the forested terrain around Martin Cave provided no suitable helicopter landing zone near the entrance. The solution used the current river as a transportation corridor. A park boat stood ready to transport Tracy to a nearby gravel bar where a helicopter could safely land. This improvised helipad allowed rapid transfer from ground rescue to air medical transport. The boat ride was brief but critical. Tracy's condition remained unstable, and Knutson continued emergency medical care during water transport. The current river, normally used for recreation, now served as a lifeline. The helicopter crew was standing by at the gravel bar landing zone. Tracy was quickly transferred to the aircraft where flight medics took over her care. The helicopter's advanced life support capabilities provided higher-level medical intervention than possible in the cave. Tracy was initially flown to Ozarks Medical Center in West Plains, the nearest trauma facility. However, her head injuries required even more specialized care. She was transferred to St. John's Hospital in Springfield, where neurosurgical specialists could address her brain trauma. At St. John's Hospital, Tracy underwent emergency surgery. The surgical team worked to relieve intracranial pressure and repair brain tissue damage. Her condition was listed as critical, though doctors were cautiously optimistic about her survival chances. The entire rescue operation took just over 2 hours from emergency call to hospital arrival. This rapid response was crucial, given her injuries, and demonstrated effective coordination, even in challenging cave environments. As Tracy began recovery in intensive care, her birthday celebration on August 10, 2002, became a lesson on how caves can turn dangerous when safety precautions are ignored. Monday morning, March 2nd, 2022. Two young men stood at the mouth of an unmarked cave on Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. Gabriel Vaughn, 21, and Robbie Dobos, 23, knew they shouldn't be here. The no trespassing signs made that crystal clear, but the lure of unexplored darkness proved too strong to resist. The cave system beneath Lookout Mountain was notorious among local spelunkers. A multi-level labyrinth that stretched for miles underground. Most explorers knew to bring proper gear, especially for the infamous 600-foot crawl around 183 meters that lay deep within the system. Gabriel and Robbie had neither experience nor equipment. They had only headlamps, regular clothes, and the reckless confidence of youth. The entrance welcomed them with cool, damp air that carried the scent of ancient stone and underground streams. The temperature dropped steadily as they ventured deeper, but excitement and adrenaline kept them warm. Gabriel led the way, his footsteps echoing off wet stone walls. Behind him, Robbie followed. They felt like explorers discovering a new world, completely unaware of the dangers lurking in the mountain's depths. Time became meaningless in the eternal darkness, where their lights created the only reality that mattered. Hours passed unnoticed in the underground realm. They marked their route casually with small stones and scratches on walls, confident they could retrace their steps. The cave seemed to guide them deeper with each turn, each passage promising greater discoveries ahead. Their casual approach to navigation would soon prove catastrophic. The passages grew more complex as they ventured deeper. Tunnels branched off in multiple directions, some leading upward toward unseen chambers, others descending into watery depths. The air grew thicker and more humid. Then came the crawl. The passage narrowed dramatically, forcing them to their hands and knees, then to their bellies. Water seeped constantly through limestone cracks above, creating a shallow stream that immediately soaked through their cotton clothes. For 600 feet, nearly 183 meters, they wriggled forward like earthworms through the claustrophobic tunnel, their lights flickering off wet rock inches from their faces. The crawl seemed to last forever. Cold water penetrated every layer of clothing, leaching precious body heat with each meter traveled. Their breath came in sharp gasps as the tunnel seemed to press down on them from all sides. Panic threatened to overwhelm them, but they pushed forward, driven by the hope of reaching larger passages ahead. When they finally emerged into a larger chamber, their bodies were shaking uncontrollably. The hypothermia had begun its insidious work during the brutal crawl. Their wet clothes clung to their bodies like ice, and their core temperatures were dropping dangerously. What had started as an adventure was becoming a fight for survival. Disorientation set in quickly. The passages all looked identical now under their weakening lights. Their casual trail markers seemed to have vanished, or perhaps their hypothermic minds simply couldn't recognize them anymore. Fear crept in as battery levels dropped and their headlamps began dimming to faint yellow glows. They wandered for hours through identical-looking passages, growing weaker and more confused with each wrong turn. Their voices became slurred, their movements sluggish. The cold was winning, and they knew it. Seeking shelter, they huddled together in a small chamber deep in the farthest reaches of the cave system, hoping someone would find them before it was too late. Tuesday came and went in the world above, while Gabriel and Robbie remained trapped in their underground prison, growing weaker as hypothermia tightened its grip. The call came Tuesday evening when worried families contacted the Chattanooga Fire Department. Two young men had failed to return from what family members reluctantly admitted was an unauthorized cave exploration. The location, somewhere in the restricted cave systems beneath Lookout Mountain. The lieutenant there had been with the rescue service for 15 years. She knew Lookout Mountain's underground maze intimately. Every passage, every dangerous crawl, every dead end where lost explorers might seek refuge. The mountain held secrets that could trap the unprepared for days. Her team assembled quickly. The rescue would require specialized equipment for the notorious 600-foot crawl, a section that challenged even experienced cavers. They loaded wetsuits, thermal blankets, emergency food supplies, and powerful LED arrays that could illuminate entire chambers. The search began immediately, but Lookout Mountain's cave system was vast. Miles of passages spread across multiple levels, connected by narrow shafts and treacherous crawls. The team knew that hypothermic victims often became disoriented, sometimes traveling deeper instead of toward exits. The rescue operation was complicated by the cave's location near active Norfolk Southern railway lines. Vibrations from passing freight trains could destabilize loose rock formations, creating additional hazards for both victims and rescuers. Rescuers coordinated with railway dispatch to minimize train traffic during critical search phases. The team split into groups, each taking different sections of the mapped cave system. They moved methodically, calling out every few minutes and listening for responses. The search continued through the night, with fresh teams rotating in as others rested. At 3:45 a.m. Wednesday morning, rescuers' radio crackled with the news they'd been hoping for. The advance team had found voices echoing from the farthest known section of the cave system, nearly 2 miles, 3.2 kilometers, from the entrance and deep underground. Gabriel and Robbie were discovered huddled together in a small chamber, conscious but severely hypothermic. They had been lost for over 36 hours, their clothes still damp from the brutal crawl that had started their ordeal. Their core body temperatures had dropped dangerously low, and confusion clouded their thinking. Rescuers immediately provided warm clothing and emergency food supplies. The young men were weak but mobile, able to walk with assistance. However, the journey back would take them through the same 600-foot crawl that had nearly defeated them on the way in. This time, they had help. Rescue team members guided them through the narrow passage, providing constant encouragement and monitoring their condition. Emergency heat packs kept hypothermia from worsening during the lengthy extraction. The rescue effort required Norfolk Southern to halt train traffic for several hours, causing significant delays throughout their rail system. The cost of the operation extended far beyond the rescue team's resources, affecting freight schedules across multiple states. By dawn Wednesday, Gabriel and Robbie emerged from the cave entrance they had entered 2 days earlier. Paramedics waited with warming blankets and hot beverages, checking vital signs and monitoring for complications from their extended hypothermia. Both young men recovered fully, but faced potential criminal trespassing charges for their unauthorized exploration. The cave system remained off limits for good reason. Its dangers had been proven once again by 2 explorers who learned the hard way that experience and proper equipment aren't optional underground. For the lieutenant and her team, it was another successful rescue mission beneath Lookout Mountain. The mountain had tested 2 young adventurers and found them unprepared, but human skill and determination had brought them safely home. On August 14, 1999, 4 experienced cave explorers descended into what they thought would be a routine evaluation of a Utah cave system. What they discovered in the depths would turn into a nightmare scenario. The B and G sinkhole sits in the rugged terrain of Utah, part of a vast network of underground cave systems that snake through the limestone bedrock for miles. This particular cave wasn't some tourist attraction or well-mapped recreational spot. This was serious caving territory, the kind of place where only experienced spelunkers with proper equipment and training would even consider venturing. On this particular August day, 4 men had made the journey to this remote location for what seemed like a straightforward mission. Rodney Mulder, Doug Zetis, Wesley Gurney, and Brent Hobbs were all seasoned explorers with years of experience between them. But they weren't there for recreation or exploration. They were conducting a professional evaluation of the cave system to determine if it would be suitable for future rescue training operations. These weren't weekend warriors playing around with ropes and headlamps. These were the guys who got called when other people got trapped underground. The plan was simple and routine, something they'd done dozens of times before. They would rig the main pit with their rope system, have one person descend to survey the cave's dimensions and accessibility, then come back up with a full report on whether this location would work for training future rescue operations. Doug Zetis was chosen to make the descent. He was experienced, methodical, and had made similar reconnaissance descents countless times before. The team carefully rigged their rope system at the top of the sinkhole, double-checking all their anchor points and safety equipment. Everything looked perfect. As Zetis began his descent into the B and G sinkhole, everything was going exactly according to plan. He rappelled down smoothly. But as Zetis continued his descent, something became terrifyingly apparent. The rope wasn't long enough. When he reached the end of their carefully measured rope system, he found himself dangling in midair, still about 40 feet, 12 meters, above the cave floor. Now, 40 feet might not sound like much when you're standing on solid ground, but when you're hanging from a rope in complete darkness in an underground pit, 40 feet might as well be 400 feet. He was stranded in the most dangerous possible position, too far down to climb back up easily, and too far above the floor to safely drop down. This was already a serious problem, but Zetis was experienced enough to handle it. He knew what he had to do, and that was to switch to his ascenders, specialized climbing devices that grip the rope and allow a climber to inch their way back up and climb back to the surface so the team could rig a longer rope to reach the bottom. Ascenders are basically the lifeline for any serious spelunker. They're mechanical devices that slide up the rope easily, but lock in place when weight is applied downward, allowing you to essentially walk up a vertical rope. But as Zetis attached his ascenders to the rope and began his ascent, he immediately ran into a problem that would turn this routine evaluation into a potential death sentence. The cave was muddy. Not just a little damp or slightly dirty. We're talking about thick, cold, clinging mud that coated everything. And as Zetis had rappelled down the rope had been dragging through this mud, picking up layers of the thick, clay-like substance that was now coating the entire length of the line. When Zetis tried to use his ascenders, the mud-covered rope immediately clogged the delicate mechanisms inside the devices. Ascenders work by gripping the rope with tiny metal teeth, but when those teeth get packed full of thick mud, they can't grip anything. Instead of locking in place and supporting his weight, the ascenders were slipping down the rope, unable to get any purchase on the slick, mud-coated surface. The cold mud wasn't just clogging his equipment, it was covering him from head to toe, soaking through his clothing and gear. Underground cave systems maintain a constant cool temperature year-round, usually in the 50s, Fahrenheit, around 10 degrees Celsius, and being covered in cold, wet mud while hanging motionless in that environment was rapidly sapping his body heat. Hypothermia was becoming a real and immediate threat. Zetis tried desperately to clean the mud out of his ascenders while hanging on the rope. He scraped at the mechanisms with his fingers, trying to clear out the thick clay that had packed into every crevice of the devices. But working with frozen, mud-covered fingers in complete darkness while suspended on a rope is nearly impossible. Every time he thought he had cleared enough mud to make the ascenders work, they would slip again, unable to grip the slick rope. The psychological pressure of the situation was overwhelming. Here was an experienced cave rescuer who had trained others in rescue techniques, and he was now facing the very real possibility that he might not make it out of this cave alive. Finally, with no other choice, Zetis called up to his teammates at the surface. He explained his dire situation. He was stranded on the rope, his ascenders had failed due to mud contamination, and he needed immediate assistance to get back to the surface. The three men at the top of the pit immediately understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just an inconvenience or a minor equipment malfunction. Their teammate was trapped in a life-threatening position, and they needed to act fast before hypothermia or equipment failure turned this evaluation mission into a recovery operation. Rodney Mulder, Wesley Gurney, and Brent Hobbs quickly rigged a haul system, a mechanical advantage system using pulleys and anchors that would allow them to physically pull Zetis back up the rope. This wasn't easy work. Hauling a full-grown man up 40 feet, 12 meters of rope, requires significant mechanical advantage and careful coordination. One mistake in the rigging or timing could result in a catastrophic failure that would send Zetis plummeting to the cave floor. The haul system they rigged allowed the three men to pull with enough force to lift Zetis's weight, plus all his gear. But it was slow, methodical work. They had to pull a few feet at a time, reset their grip on the haul line, and pull again. All the while, Zetis was hanging in the darkness below, covered in cold mud and fighting hypothermia. As they began hauling him up, the situation remained precarious. The same mud that had disabled his ascenders was now making the entire rope system slippery and unpredictable. The haul line could slip at any moment, and if their anchor points failed under the strain, Zetis would fall to certain death on the rocks below. Inch by agonizing inch, they pulled him back toward the surface. The haul system creaked and strained under the load, and everyone involved knew that they were in a race against time. Zetis was becoming increasingly close to becoming hypothermic. After what felt like an eternity, Zetis finally reached the top of the pit. When his teammates pulled him over the edge to safety, he was almost unrecognizable. He was covered from head to toe in thick, cold mud that had penetrated every piece of his clothing and equipment. His core body temperature had dropped dangerously low, and he was shivering uncontrollably from the hypothermia that had set in during his ordeal. But he was alive. They prepared fire to provide him with heat and warm water while they packed up their gear and prepared to leave the site. It was clear that the B and G sinkhole would not be approved for rescue training operations. The cave system was simply too unpredictable and dangerous, with environmental conditions that could disable critical safety equipment without warning. Doug Zetis recovered fully from his hypothermia and returned to caving. On March 24th, 1973, Private Randall Brown woke before dawn at Fort Rucker, Alabama. At 20 years old, he had that restless energy that made weekend leave precious. Today, he and Private Daniel Hazy were going back to the mine shaft they'd discovered the previous week. The abandoned mine sat hidden in thick Alabama woods, its entrance barely visible under decades of fallen leaves. Local stories claimed iron ore miners had worked these hills in the 1800s before abandoning their claims. Most shafts had been left to rot, slowly surrendering to time and weather. Randall had always been drawn to such forgotten places. Growing up in rural Minnesota, he had spent countless hours exploring old barns, abandoned farmhouses, and forgotten cellar holes that dotted the countryside around his family's property. There was something deeply satisfying about uncovering traces of human endeavor that had been swallowed by the wilderness, about standing in spaces where previous generations had worked and dreamed and struggled. The military had broadened his horizons, but had not diminished his appetite for discovery. Their first visit last weekend had been cautious. They'd ventured maybe 15 meters, 49 feet, into the tunnel before deciding to return with proper equipment. The glimpse they'd caught of the mine's depths only intensified their desire to explore further. Preparation for this second expedition had occupied much of their free time during the week. They had acquired military-grade flashlights, rope, and basic safety equipment from base supplies. Neither soldier possessed formal training in cave exploration or mine safety, but their military background had instilled a confidence in their ability to handle whatever challenges they might encounter. Youth and inexperience often conspired to mask potential dangers, transforming reasonable caution into mere afterthought. The hike took 40 minutes through dense forest. Ancient pines towered overhead, while hardwood trees created a thick canopy that filtered the morning light. Wildlife tracks marked the soft earth beneath their boots. The Alabama wilderness felt untamed here, far from civilization. They reached the mine entrance as the sun climbed higher. Cool air flowed from the opening, carrying the scent of damp earth and rotting wood. Both soldiers checked their flashlights and adjusted their gear before stepping into the darkness. The initial section looked solid enough. Wooden support beams crossed the ceiling every few feet, holding back tons of earth above. The walls were packed with dirt reinforced with occasional stones. Their flashlight beams revealed a tunnel that descended gradually into the hillside. For the first 30 meters, 98 feet, everything went smoothly. The construction appeared professional, built to last. The miners who'd worked here decades ago had known their trade, but as they ventured deeper, things began to change. The wooden supports became less frequent. Some showed clear signs of rot and insect damage, Water stains marked the walls where seasonal flooding had weakened the foundations. Small piles of dirt and stones suggested minor collapses that had been hastily cleared. Randall took the lead as the tunnel's character deteriorated. His military training gave him confidence in dangerous situations, though nothing had prepared him for the specific hazards of abandoned mining operations. The excitement of discovery overrode any caution he might have felt. Around the 90-meter, 295-foot mark, the tunnel began climbing upward. This secondary shaft had been carved to follow a promising ore vein deeper into the hillside. The workmanship here was clearly inferior to the main entrance. The passage narrowed as it climbed, forcing both soldiers to duck slightly to avoid the increasingly unstable ceiling. Here, the construction was clearly inferior to the main tunnel. Timber supports were spaced farther apart, and many showed signs of rot and insect damage. The walls consisted almost entirely of packed earth with minimal stone reinforcement, and several areas showed clear evidence of previous partial collapses that had been inadequately cleared. The floor was soft and treacherous, with hidden puddles and unstable footing that required constant attention. The smell of decay was stronger here, mixing the odor of rotting wood with the musty scent of disturbed earth. Despite these obvious warning signs, both soldiers continued their ascent. The adventure was proving everything they had hoped for, and the challenges only added to the excitement. Randall's military training had taught him to push through discomfort and perceive danger, to complete the mission regardless of obstacles. Unfortunately, that same training had not equipped him to recognize the specific hazards associated with abandoned mine workings. Neither soldier recognized that those same instincts could prove deadly in circumstances like these. The ceiling became progressively worse. What appeared to be solid packed earth was actually a precarious mixture of loose soil, small rocks, and organic debris accumulated over decades. The few surviving support beams struggled under loads they were never designed to carry. At roughly 90 meters, 295 feet, from the entrance, disaster struck without warning. Randall's flashlight had just illuminated what looked like a larger chamber ahead when the ceiling directly above gave way. The collapse began with a shower of pebbles and dirt clods, a 2-second warning before the main event. A section of ceiling roughly 3 meters, 10 feet long, suddenly dropped. The breach immediately began widening as additional material cascaded downward. Randall found himself directly beneath the failure point, with no time to react. The earth fell in successive waves. Each layer brought down more debris in an accelerating avalanche of destruction. The compromised wooden supports snapped like matchsticks under the sudden additional weight. The initial cascade drove Randall to his knees. His flashlight spun away into darkness as he instinctively raised his hands to protect his head. The loose earth flowed around him with frightening speed, filling every available space like water. Then the ground beneath him gave away, and he went inside a vertical crack. All the dirt and debris started burying him alive, and within moments, debris had risen to his chest, pinning him completely. Movement became impossible. The weight pressed down relentlessly, making each breath more labored than the last. Despite his desperate efforts to keep his airway clear, loose earth found its way into his mouth and nose. Daniel's rescue attempts proved futile from the start. The continuing collapse made any approach impossibly dangerous. The sheer volume of falling material was far beyond what one person could hope to move. He could only watch helplessly as his friend disappeared beneath tons of debris. The sound of Randall's struggles gradually diminished as more earth poured down. Each new load compressed his chest further, making breathing increasingly difficult. The loose soil filled every space with relentless efficiency. Panic gave way to grim realization. The weight crushing his ribs made expansion impossible. His lungs burned for oxygen that would never come. The flowing earth pressed against his face from all directions, eliminating any possibility of drawing breath. The rumbling gradually subsided, leaving an oppressive silence. What had been a passable mine shaft was now completely sealed by thousands of pounds of earth and stone. The damage was total and irreversible. Daniel stumbled back through the stable section of tunnel, emerging into daylight to summon help. But he knew his friend was beyond rescue. The collapse had been too massive, too complete. It seemed Randall's final moments were spent in complete darkness, surrounded by the weight of the collapsed hillside. The excitement of exploration had become a suffocating nightmare with no possibility of escape. The rescue team that arrived 2 hours later brought heavy equipment and excavation tools. They worked methodically to dig through the collapsed section, knowing they were recovering a body rather than saving a life. The rescue team that eventually recovered Randall's body 2 hours later found a young soldier who had died doing what he loved, exploring the hidden places where history and adventure intersected. The mine shaft was permanently sealed following the recovery operation, ensuring that no other curious explorers would meet the same fate. But somewhere in the Alabama wilderness, other forgotten passages still wait in darkness, their secrets guarded by the same patient. Inexorable forces that claimed Private Randall L. Brown on that March morning in 1973. Randall's death was recorded in military files as a cave-in accident during recreational exploration. June 1997. The mountains of northern Pakistan blazed under an unusually hot sun. 33-year-old Nasiruddin gripped his horse's reins tighter as he looked back at the village he and his brother were leaving forever. The Saleh Khel tribe was tearing itself apart. What started as a property dispute had escalated into bloodshed. Relatives were choosing sides. Men were dying in the streets. The feud had reached a point where staying meant certain death. Nasir's heart ached as he thought about what he was leaving behind, his wife and 2 young children who depended on him. But the violence had made it impossible to stay. If he remained, he would either be killed or forced to kill, and his family would suffer either way. He and his brother Kathiruddin knew these mountains well. They had spent years exploring the caves and glaciers of the region, learning the secret paths that smugglers and refugees used. Their knowledge of the treacherous terrain was their only advantage now. They packed what they could and rode into the night, heading for the remote Kohistan region where nobody would follow. The brothers had been riding for hours when they reached Supat Valley. This wasn't just any valley. It was a place locals whispered about, a place where the ice never melted and travelers sometimes vanished without a trace. Nasir's horse snorted nervously as they approached a massive glacier. The ice stretched out like a frozen ocean, beautiful but deadly. Cracks and crevices split its surface like scars. They needed shelter. The mountain winds were getting stronger, and exhaustion was setting in. That's when Nasir spotted a dark opening in the glacier wall, a cave. Kathir stayed with the horses while Nasir walked toward the cave entrance. The opening was wide enough for a man to enter comfortably. Inside, the walls glowed with an eerie blue light that ancient compressed ice creates. Nasir stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly. His breath came out in white puffs as he moved deeper into the cave, looking for a place where they could safely camp for the night. The floor looked solid, thick blue ice that seemed like it had been there for centuries. But appearances in glaciers can be deadly. As Nasir took another step forward, the world exploded beneath his feet. The ice floor wasn't solid at all. It was just a thin shell covering a massive crevice that dropped deep into the glacier's heart. The crack echoed like thunder as the false floor gave way. Nasir plummeted into darkness. He fell past walls of ancient ice, past layers that had been forming for thousands of years. The crevice was narrow, just wide enough for a human body, and it seemed to go on forever. 20 feet down, 50 feet, 100 feet. His body slammed into a narrow ledge deep inside the crevice, and everything went black. Above, Kathir heard the crash. He ran to the cave entrance and peered into a hole in the floor that seemed to go straight down to hell. He called his brother's name over and over, but only echoes returned. Kathir ran for help. Within hours, local villagers arrived with ropes and lanterns. They lowered men into the crevice as far as they dared, but the crack was too deep and too narrow. The walls were slick ice that offered no grip. They searched for 3 days, but the glacier had already begun to close the wound. New snow was falling, and the crevice was sealing itself shut. Nasir had vanished. What happened next was something that no one ever imagined. The moment Nasir's body hit that ledge, the extreme cold began working on him. The temperature was so far below freezing that his body froze almost instantly. But this wasn't ordinary freezing. The glacier created perfect conditions for preservation. There was no oxygen down in that crevice, no moisture, no bacteria that could cause decay. Instead of rotting, the cold sucked out all the water from his cells, preserving everything: his skin, his clothes, even his facial features. He became trapped in time. Years passed. Nasir's wife waited for news that never came. His 2 children grew up without their father. The family never stopped hoping he might return. But as the years turned into decades, hope faded. The glacier kept its secret. Every winter, new snow piled on top of the crevice. Every summer, some of it melted, but not enough to reveal what lay beneath. Nasir sank deeper and deeper into the ice. For 28 years, he lay there in perfect preservation, like an ancient Egyptian pharaoh in an ice tomb. But the world was changing above the glacier. Starting in the early 2000s, temperatures in northern Pakistan began rising. The change was gradual at first, but it accelerated year after year. The massive glaciers that had existed for millennia started melting faster than they ever had before. Each summer brought record heat. The ice that had taken thousands of years to accumulate began disappearing at an alarming rate. By 2025, the glacier in Supat Valley had retreated dramatically. Sections that had been buried under tons of ice were now exposed to sunlight for the first time in decades. The landscape looked completely different from when Nasir had first entered that cave. On August 1st, 2025, a local shepherd named Omar Khan was making his way across what used to be the heart of the glacier. The ice had melted so much that he was walking on ground that had been buried since before he was born. That's when he saw something that stopped him cold. Sticking out of the melting ice was what looked like a person. But that was impossible. Who would be way out here in this remote location? Omar moved closer and couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a man, perfectly preserved, his clothes completely intact. He looked like he had just laid down for a nap. His facial features were clear, his hair was still in place, and even his clothing showed no signs of decay. But this wasn't any recent accident. The man's clothing style was from decades ago. His hair was longer than modern fashion. Something was very strange about this discovery. Omar found an identity card in the man's pocket. The name read Nasiruddin. The card was dated from the 1990s, but it was still perfectly legible after nearly 3 decades in the ice. Word spread quickly through the remote villages. Police arrived to investigate what seemed impossible. A man who had been missing for 28 years, preserved as if he had died yesterday. Local police officer Amjad Hussain took charge of the case. When they ran the identification through their records, they discovered that Nasir had indeed been reported missing in June 1997. His brother Kathiruddin was still alive and was contacted immediately. The reunion was heartbreaking. Kathir, now much older and grayer, looked at his brother, who appeared exactly as he had on that terrible day in 1997. Time had stood still for Nasir while it had marched on relentlessly for everyone else. DNA tests were ordered to confirm the identity, though Nasir's family recognized him immediately. His clothing, his build, even the scar on his hand from a childhood accident. Everything matched their memories perfectly. The discovery made international headlines. Scientists explained how the extreme conditions in the glacier crevice had created a natural mummification process. When a body falls into a glacier, the extreme cold freezes it so fast that decomposition cannot begin. The lack of moisture and oxygen in the ice creates perfect preservation conditions. For Nasir's family, the discovery brought closure after decades of uncertainty. His wife had passed away years earlier, still wondering what had happened to her husband. But his children, now adults with families of their own, finally had answers about their father's fate. At 2:30 in the morning, the phone rang, jolting Logan's mother from deep sleep. Her husband Lonnie reached for it while she listened anxiously beside him. Nothing good ever came from calls at this hour. The voice belonged to one of Logan's college friends. Logan's trapped in the cave. The next few sentences turned their world around. He's been stuck down there for over 7 hours. The rescue workers are here, but things look really bad. You need to come now. Logan's mother collapsed beside the bed, trembling as images flooded her mind. Her 20-year-old son trapped in crushing darkness, maybe dying. 12 hours earlier, May 18th, 2012, had started like any other spring day. Logan Eliason and his college friends had driven to Maquoketa Cave State Park in Iowa for a weekend camping trip. It was something they did regularly. Logan had been exploring these caves since he was a boy, first with his father Lonnie, then with his friends as he grew older. The group set up camp and spent the afternoon exploring different caves throughout the park. Logan knew these limestone corridors like the back of his hand. As evening approached around 7 p.m., the group gathered around their campfire to prepare dinner. The day had been perfect for caving. Not too hot, not too cold. Most of the friends were content to relax and cook, but Logan and his friend Emma Thompson weren't quite ready to call it a day. Logan pointed towards a trail that led to Y Cave. Emma, also an experienced cave explorer who had been through many of these caves before, agreed. They grabbed their headlamps and headed off, promising the others they'd be back within an hour or two to help with dinner. Y Cave welcomed them. Logan led the way confidently through passages he had navigated dozens of times. They moved deeper into the cave system. Logan was excited to show Emma a section of the cave she hadn't seen before. There was an incredible chamber just through a particular passage where the rock formations were amazing. What Logan didn't realize was that caves can be deceptively dangerous. A passage that seems routine can become a death trap under the wrong circumstances. The passage began to narrow dramatically as they ventured deeper. Logan, being taller and more familiar with the cave, managed to squeeze through a particularly tight section without much difficulty. Behind him, Emma followed, trusting his lead completely. But as the passage continued to constrict, Emma began to feel something was terribly wrong. The walls seemed to be closing in around her like a vice. Her breathing became labored, not from exertion, but from growing panic, as the space around her body grew tighter and tighter. Emma called out to Logan, her voice already showing strain, saying she thought she was getting stuck. Logan called back reassuringly, telling her to take her time and breathe slowly while inching forward. But Emma's situation was rapidly becoming critical. The passage had narrowed to a point where her body was wedged between the floor and ceiling of the cave. Every time she tried to move forward, the space seemed to grip her tighter. What had started as discomfort was now becoming a terrifying trap. She felt like the cave walls were crushing her, and she couldn't breathe properly. Logan realized immediately that this was no ordinary stuck situation. He could hear the terror in Emma's voice. In the absolute darkness of the cave, being unable to move felt like being buried alive. Working carefully in the narrow space, Logan managed to turn around, a difficult and exhausting process underground. He reached back and found Emma's hand, gripping it tightly and reassuring her that he was right there and they would get her out. Emma was hyperventilating now, her panic attacks making everything worse. The cave felt like it was suffocating her, squeezing the life out of her with every breath. Logan stayed calm, holding her hand and talking to her continuously. When she started shivering from the cold cave air and her own shock, he removed his shirt and worked it back to her for extra warmth. Fortunately, another couple was exploring Y Cave that same evening. They heard Emma's distressed calls through the passages and found their way to the trapped pair. But when they saw the situation, Emma wedged tightly in the narrow passage with Logan, unable to help her move. They realized this was far beyond what anyone without specialized equipment could handle. The couple told them they were going to get help before heading quickly toward the cave entrance to call 911. Above ground, as full darkness settled over the state park, emergency vehicles began arriving. Rescue crews entered Y Cave with specialized equipment, working carefully in the narrow passages to reach Emma. They promptly started the supposedly only rescue operation of the night. The rescue operation for Emma took careful coordination. Working in shifts because of the limited space and oxygen, they started chiseling the passage to make more space and making sure it's done in a way that the cave walls don't collapse. After 4 hours underground and 30 minutes of careful extraction work, Emma was finally freed from the passage that had held her prisoner. She emerged with scrapes and bruises and was taken to the hospital, but she was alive and safe. Logan felt tremendous relief watching Emma being carried out of the cave. He had held her hand for hours, talking her through her panic attacks and keeping her warm in the cold underground air. But his relief was short-lived. Things were about to get worse. When the rescue workers began leading him out through the same route they had used for Emma, Logan discovered something that would turn his relief into his own nightmare. As Logan tried to maneuver over a crevice in the passage, exhausted from the hours of stress and physical strain, he slipped. In an instant, he dropped deep and found himself wedged even more severely than Emma had been. He was stuck face down with his arms pinned beneath him, his body trapped between rock formations with a solid ledge above him pressing down. Unlike Emma's situation, this was far more dire. Logan couldn't move at all. He couldn't even turn his head properly. The rescue that should have ended with Emma's freedom had become something much worse. Outside, panic erupted as soon as everyone received the news of Logan being trapped, and that too, in a more peculiar situation. The rescuers were well aware of how tight the passage is, and how oxygen depletion could kill him in a short amount of time. His trapped position also meant that his blood will start flowing towards his brain, and the gravity pull will strain all his organs, causing medical complications. Hours passed away as rescuers tried to get Logan out. The operation was now much more difficult. Logan's family was contacted immediately. As soon as the news reached his parents, Logan's father held his wife as she trembled in his arms. He told her he had to go to the cave site and that she should stay with their 4 younger boys who were still sleeping, unaware their big brother was fighting for his life underground. By dawn, Logan's mother couldn't wait any longer. She had to go, so Logan's grandfather drove her to the cave site, where a massive rescue operation was underway. Dozens of emergency vehicles filled the area. Ambulances, fire trucks, police cars, EMT trucks from across the region. A steady stream of rescue workers moved in and out of the cave entrance. She found Lonnie on a hill overlooking the cave, his jaw clenched with worry. The news was grim. Logan was trapped face down with his arms pinned beneath him. Above him was a solid rock ledge. The space was so narrow that only one rescue worker could access it at a time, and they could only work 20-minute shifts because there wasn't enough oxygen. Lonnie explained that they had managed to get oxygen near Logan, but he was still too hard to reach properly. The rescue workers brought in air chisels to carefully chip away at the rock, but progress was painfully slow. They managed to get power bars to Logan to maintain his energy and started an IV to prevent dehydration. The oxygen mask was crucial. The confined space and noise from the chisels created dangerous conditions. Hours crawled by as Logan's parents waited on the hill, knowing their son was somewhere directly beneath their feet. One rescue worker approached with encouraging news. Logan had freed one arm and was actually close enough to touch the rescuer's collar. They could finally get him better oxygen access. But then Logan's mother overheard Lonnie speaking quietly to another rescuer, telling him that if Logan went into shock or if they thought he wasn't coming out, Lonnie wanted to go down to hold his boy's hand. When she asked a rescue worker what they should pray for, his answer was sobering. Pray that Logan has the strength to help lift himself out. That's the only way. The reality was stark. After nearly 20 hours underground, Logan would need to find whatever strength he had left to help pull himself free. The rock formation made it impossible for rescuers to lift him out alone. As the hours passed, friends began singing hymns for comfort. Logan's mother, initially too overwhelmed to join in, eventually found her voice in Amazing Grace. The words felt meaningful. They had come through dangers and trials, and they were praying grace would lead Logan home. Down in the cave, Logan was fighting his own battle against exhaustion and fear, but he wasn't giving up. Like his mother above ground, he found strength in song, quietly singing to himself in the darkness, knowing somehow that God was there with him in the depths. The rescue operation had reached a critical point. The air chisels had done all they could. The rescuers had carefully chipped away every bit of rock they safely could, without risking a collapse that would trap Logan permanently. Now came the most dangerous part of the entire operation. The rescue workers explained to Logan that they had created just enough space for him to possibly squeeze free, but he would need to use whatever strength he had left to help get himself out. The rock formation made it impossible for them to simply lift him. He had to be an active participant in his own rescue. Logan, exhausted and oxygen-deprived after 20 hours underground, somehow found the strength to work with his rescuers. Using the small amount of space they had created, he managed to get better leverage with his arms. The rescue workers positioned themselves to help guide and support him, but the actual movement had to come from Logan himself. It was agonizing work. Every inch forward required tremendous effort from Logan, who was fighting against exhaustion, dehydration, and the crushing weight of rock around him. Then, in a moment that seemed almost miraculous after the endless hours of careful chiseling and failed attempts, Logan managed to pull his torso free from the crevice that had held him prisoner. The rescue workers immediately grabbed him and helped guide him through the passage to safety. The word spread quickly through the command center above ground. Logan was free of the crevice. He was conscious, responsive, and moving under his own power through the cave passages toward the entrance. When Logan finally emerged from Y Cave, 20 hours after he had entered it the evening before, he was barely recognizable, covered head to toe in limestone dust and cave mud, exhausted beyond measure, with scrapes and bruises covering his arms and face. But he was walking, and he was breathing, and he was home. His mother rode with him in the ambulance to the hospital, unable to take her eyes off her son, touching his hand to make sure he was really there. The nightmare that had begun with a 2:30 a.m. phone call was finally over. The morning of May 2nd, 1976, dawned bright and clear across the Yorkshire Dales. 6 members of the Newcastle University Caving Club gathered their equipment and prepared for what they thought would be another exciting underground adventure. They had chosen Langstroth Pot, a challenging cave system near Upper Wharfdale, known for its dramatic vertical drops, rushing water, and series of underwater passages called sumps. The 6 friends, Martin Blackburn, Brian Fox, Donald Southern, and 3 others, had been caving together for months. They trusted each other completely and had developed the skills necessary for tackling difficult cave systems. In 1976, cave diving was still a developing sport. Very few explorers had access to specialized scuba equipment, and freediving through short sumps was considered routine practice. The technique was straightforward. Take a deep breath, duck underwater, pull yourself along the passage using handholds on the rock walls, and surface in the next chamber where you could breathe again. It required good lung capacity, strong swimming skills, and absolute confidence in your abilities. The group entered Langstroth Pot in good spirits. They moved through the initial chambers methodically, following established routes and checking their equipment regularly. The cave was behaving exactly as they expected: cold, wet, and challenging, but nothing beyond their experience level. Water levels were normal for the season, and conditions seemed ideal for their planned route. As they progressed deeper into Langstroth, they encountered the cave's famous series of vertical drops and narrow passages. Each obstacle was tackled with careful precision. They moved as a team, ensuring everyone made it safely through each section before continuing forward. Hours passed underground as they navigated the complex cave system. Finally, they reached the sump that would change everything. It appeared no different from the dozens of other underwater passages they had successfully navigated over the years. Water flowed through a submerged tunnel in the limestone, and on the other side, they could see evidence of an air pocket where they would be able to surface and breathe. The plan was simple and routine. The first 3 spelunkers would free dive through the sump, surface in the chamber beyond, rest and recover, then continue exploring while the remaining 3 followed when ready. It was a technique they had used countless times before in similar cave systems throughout the Yorkshire Dales. Martin Blackburn went first. He took several deep breaths to oxygenate his blood, hyperventilated briefly to purge carbon dioxide from his system, then took one final massive breath and disappeared beneath the dark water. The sump passage was perhaps 20 or 30 feet long, a distance that should have taken less than a minute to traverse for a strong swimmer. Brian Fox followed next, using the same preparation routine. Like Martin, he vanished into the dark water with confidence, his light disappearing into the submerged tunnel. Donald Southern went last of the first group, following the same technique that had served them well in cave after cave throughout their caving careers. They emerged as planned, gasping and triumphant, in what appeared to be a perfect air pocket on the far side of the sump. The chamber seemed like salvation, a place to rest, recover, and prepare for the next section of the cave. They had done it hundreds of times before in other caves. Surface in the air bell, catch your breath, and continue the exploration. This time was different. From the perspective of the three explorers still waiting their turn, everything appeared normal. Their friends had made the dive, and presumably surfaced safely in the chamber beyond. There were no sounds of distress, no indication that anything had gone wrong. What the three cave explorers didn't know, what none of them could have known, was that the air pocket they had surfaced in was contaminated. The chamber contained what spelunkers call bad air, an atmosphere where oxygen had been depleted and replaced with dangerous levels of carbon dioxide. The atmosphere in the chamber was poison, but poison that looked, smelled, and felt exactly like normal air. There was no warning, no obvious sign of danger. The explorers surfaced, relieved to be breathing again after the stressful underwater swim, unaware that every breath was slowly killing them. Bad air can develop in underground chambers for several reasons. Organic matter decomposing in stagnant water can consume oxygen while producing carbon dioxide. Poor air circulation can allow dangerous gases to accumulate over time. Sometimes, the very rocks themselves can release gases that make breathing impossible. When Martin, Brian, and Donald surfaced in that chamber, gasping for air after their underwater swim, they were breathing poison. The gas was invisible, odorless, and absolutely deadly. With each breath, they were taking in less oxygen and more carbon dioxide than their bodies could handle. The effects of bad air are insidious. Unlike drowning, which is violent and obvious, carbon dioxide poisoning is quiet and deceptive. The victims might feel dizzy or confused at first. Their thinking becomes clouded. Physical coordination deteriorates. And then, without warning, consciousness simply fades away. The three young men had no idea what was happening to them. One moment they were recovering from their swim, planning their next move through the cave system. The next moment, their vision was blurring, their limbs were becoming heavy, and their minds were losing the ability to think clearly. One by one, Martin, Brian, and Donald lost consciousness and slipped silently beneath the water. They didn't drown in the traditional sense. They were poisoned by the very air they trusted to save them after their underwater swim. Back at the original sump entrance, the remaining three waited for their friends to return or signal that it was safe to follow. Cave exploration often involves long waits as teams move through difficult passages, so initially there was no cause for alarm. But as minutes turned to hours, concern grew. The cave system beyond the sump wasn't particularly large or complex. Their friends should have returned by now, or at least made some noise to indicate they were safe and continuing their exploration. They called out. No response came back except the endless sound of flowing water. They tried shining their lights into the sump, hoping to see some sign of their friends, but the dark water revealed nothing. Eventually, they made the difficult decision that every cave explorer dreads. They had to assume something had gone wrong and begin emergency procedures. This meant one of them would have to exit the cave system and seek help from the outside world, leaving the others to continue monitoring the situation underground. When rescue teams finally entered Langstroth Pot with proper equipment and breathing apparatus, they made a discovery that shocked even experienced cave rescue specialists. The three missing people were found in the air pocket chamber beyond the sump, not struggling in the water, not trapped by fallen rocks, but simply floating peacefully as if they had fallen asleep. The rescue teams quickly realized what had happened when they tested the air in the chamber. The atmosphere was toxic, containing dangerous levels of carbon dioxide and insufficient oxygen to sustain human life. The chamber that should have been a safe haven had become a death trap. Martin Blackburn, Brian Fox, and Donald Southern had died not from any dramatic cave-in or underground flood, but from breathing air that looked and felt normal, but was actually poison. They had successfully completed their free dive through the sump, reached what appeared to be safety, and then been killed by the very element they needed most to survive. The rescue teams had to use specialized breathing equipment and work quickly to avoid becoming victims themselves. Even with proper gear, they could only spend limited time in the contaminated chamber before retreating to areas with breathable air. The investigation that followed revealed the cruel irony of the Langstroth pot disaster. These three young men had done everything right according to the caving practices of their time. They were experienced, properly equipped for 1970s standards, and following techniques that had been used successfully in countless other cave systems. The problem wasn't human error or reckless behavior. The problem was that they encountered a natural phenomenon that was poorly understood and virtually impossible to detect without specialized equipment that wasn't commonly available to recreational spelunkers in the 1970s. Today, every serious cave explorer knows the story of Martin Blackburn, Brian Fox, and Donald Southern. Their names are spoken with reverence in training sessions and safety briefings. Their death showcases that underground, even the air you breathe can't be trusted without verification. April 26, 1999, should have been just another technical diving adventure for Guido Gaudenzi. Instead, it became the day a single moment of confusion created chaos for the 29-year-old in the L waters of Florida's Diapolder Spring. Gaudenzi wasn't a novice. With 4 years of cave diving experience, he understood the complex world of technical diving, where every breath was calculated and every decision could mean life or death. He had trained extensively in mixed gas diving, the advanced technique that allowed divers to explore depths impossible with regular scuba equipment. On this morning, Gaudenzi descended into Diapolder Spring with fellow divers Simone Roncoli and Sandra Dirksen. Their destination was a large underwater chamber located 190 feet down, approximately 58 meters below the surface. At this crushing depth, the water pressure was nearly 6 times greater than at the surface, fundamentally changing how gases affected the human body. The 3 divers carried multiple gas tanks, each containing different mixtures of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium calculated for specific depths. This wasn't recreational diving, where a single tank of air sufficed. Technical diving required precise gas management, where breathing the wrong mixture at the wrong depth could prove instantly fatal. Each diver also carried an oxygen bottle for their final decompression stage. Standard protocol demanded leaving these oxygen tanks at the 20-foot mark, 6 meters below the surface, where pure oxygen was safe to breathe. This wasn't just recommended practice. It was a critical safety measure that prevented deadly mistakes. Pure oxygen becomes toxic at depths greater than 66 feet, 20 meters. Under increased pressure, oxygen concentrations that were life-sustaining at the surface became poison that could cause immediate convulsions and death. Every technical diver learned this fundamental rule, which made what happened next so shocking. Gaudenzi broke protocol. Instead of leaving his oxygen bottle at the designated decompression stop, he decided to carry it with him throughout the dive. Perhaps he wanted to ensure the gas would be available when needed. Or maybe he was concerned about equipment placement. Whatever his reasoning, this decision would prove fatal. The descent went smoothly. The 3 divers moved through the crystal-clear water with practiced efficiency, their lights cutting through the underwater darkness. The limestone formation surrounding them had been carved by millions of years of water flow, creating an otherworldly landscape that few humans ever experienced. At 190 feet, or 58 meters, they reached their destination. The underwater chamber opened around them like a submerged cathedral, its walls disappearing beyond their lights. The crushing water pressure at this depth would have instantly killed an unprotected human, but their specialized equipment allowed them to explore this alien environment. They spent time documenting the chamber, taking photographs, and marveling at the unique geological formations. The silence was absolute except for the rhythmic cycling of their breathing apparatus. In this environment, every breath had to be calculated, every movement considered. After completing their exploration, the team began their ascent. This was the most dangerous phase of any deep dive. The gases dissolved in their blood, and tissues under pressure had to be released gradually to prevent decompression sickness. They would make several stops at predetermined depths, allowing their bodies to safely eliminate excess gas. Their first major stop was at 120 feet, approximately 37 meters below the surface. Here, they would hover motionless for several minutes, beginning the gradual decompression process. The surface seemed impossibly distant above them, and they still had multiple stops ahead before reaching safety. At this 120-foot decompression stop, Gaudenzi made his fatal error. For reasons that would never be fully understood, he switched from his primary breathing gas to the oxygen bottle he had carried from the surface. Perhaps confusion clouded his judgment, or maybe the stress of the deep dive affected his decision-making. The moment pure oxygen entered his lungs at 120 feet, 37 meters underwater, the effects were immediate and catastrophic. The high pressure forced toxic concentrations of oxygen into his bloodstream, triggering what diving medicine calls oxygen poisoning. His central nervous system was overwhelmed by the chemical assault. Gaudenzi went into violent convulsions. His body shook uncontrollably as his nervous system misfired under the oxygen toxicity. Within seconds, he lost consciousness completely, his mind shutting down under the toxic effects. The mouthpiece connecting him to life-sustaining gas fell from his lips, floating away in the clear water. Roncalli and Dirksen watched in horror as their experienced partner transformed from a competent diver into an unconscious victim. At 120 feet, 37 meters underwater, they faced every diver's nightmare, a buddy in distress far from the surface with limited rescue options. The two divers immediately switched into emergency mode. They had trained for this scenario, but reality was far more challenging than any classroom exercise. Gaudenzi was unconscious and convulsing, his body unresponsive to their rescue attempts. Without his mouthpiece in place, he was no longer breathing the gas that kept him alive in the deep water. Roncalli and Dirksen worked frantically to save their friend. They tried to get his mouthpiece back in position, fighting against his uncontrolled movements and the challenging underwater environment. The convulsions made it nearly impossible to maintain proper equipment placement, and their own gas supplies were becoming critical as they expended energy in the rescue attempt. The physics of their situation worked against them. At 120 feet, 37 meters, they were still far from the surface and couldn't attempt rapid ascent without risking fatal decompression sickness themselves. They needed to maintain their own decompression obligations while trying to save Gaudenzi, a nearly impossible task. Minutes passed with the situation becoming increasingly desperate. Gaudenzi showed no signs of regaining consciousness, and the convulsions continued preventing effective rescue breathing. His companions faced the horrible reality that their friend was dying before their eyes, and nothing they could do would prevent it. The tragedy was made worse by how preventable it was. Oxygen toxicity limits were well understood in the diving community. The 66-foot, 20-meter threshold for pure oxygen use was fundamental knowledge drilled into every technical diver. Experienced divers developed specific protocols to prevent exactly this type of accident. Standard practice involved leaving oxygen bottles at appropriate decompression depths precisely to avoid the confusion that killed Gaudenzi. By securing oxygen supplies at 20 feet, 6 meters, divers eliminated any possibility of accidentally breathing pure oxygen at dangerous depths. Technical diving offered no margin for error. Unlike recreational scuba diving, where mistakes often resulted in inconvenience, technical diving errors could be immediately fatal. The combination of extreme depth, complex gas mixtures, and demanding decompression requirements created an environment where single mistakes proved catastrophic. After exhausting every rescue option, Roncalli and Dirksen were forced to accept the inevitable. Gaudenzi had succumbed to oxygen toxicity, and their own survival now depended on completing decompression and reaching the surface alive. They couldn't save him, but they could ensure his death didn't claim additional victims. The ascent must have been agonizing for the survivors. They were forced to complete scheduled decompression stops while dealing with trauma of watching their friend die. Each stop represented precious minutes when Gaudenzi's condition deteriorated, but rushing to the surface meant certain death from decompression sickness. When Roncalli and Dirksen finally surfaced and reported the accident, the diving community was shocked. Gaudenzi's 4 years of cave diving experience should have prevented this fundamental error, highlighting how even skilled divers could fall victim to momentary confusion. Emergency responders recovering Gaudenzi's body from that depth faced their own technical challenges. The recovery operation required specialized deep diving equipment and careful planning to avoid additional casualties. The crystal clear water that had attracted the divers now served as the site of a complex underwater recovery mission. Investigation revealed no equipment failures or external factors contributing to the death. The oxygen bottle functioned perfectly, delivering pure oxygen exactly as designed. The problem wasn't equipment failure, but inappropriate use at depths where pure oxygen became deadly poison. This reinforced understanding that human error causes most diving fatalities. The incident became a case study in technical diving courses worldwide. Instructors used Gaudenzi's death to emphasize the importance of following established protocols, regardless of experience level. The accident demonstrated that expertise couldn't compensate for momentary lapses in judgment when diving at extreme depths. On November 21, 2021, 16 people walked into a cave in Panama. Not all of them were lucky enough to come out alive. The Cueva Bayano sits about 30 miles, 48 kilometers, east of Panama City, right along the shores of Lake Bayano. It's a tourist hotspot, one of those places where adventure seekers go to see something incredible that nature carved out over millions of years. On this particular Sunday morning, a tour group of 16 people had signed up for what should have been a routine cave exploration. 11 of them were locals from Panama, 1 was a Canadian tourist with his camera gear, and 4 were friends from Venezuela who were having the time of their lives on vacation. Their guide was a guy who had been doing this for over 10 years. He knew these caves like you know your own house. He could navigate them blindfolded. The man was a professional, and everyone in that group trusted him completely. And why wouldn't they? He'd led hundreds of tours through this exact same cave system without incident. The group geared up, put on their headlamps, grabbed their equipment, and started making their way into the cave. As they headed toward the entrance, they passed a local man who knew the area well. He gave them a friendly wave and watched them disappear into the cave mouth. Everything was going perfectly. The guide was pointing out all the incredible rock formations, sharing stories about how the cave was discovered, and everyone was having an absolute blast. But here's what nobody knew. While they were underground, admiring all these geological wonders, the weather above ground was about to take a very dangerous turn. See, Panama's rainy season can be unpredictable, but what was brewing up there was particularly nasty. Heavy storm clouds were rolling in fast, carrying massive amounts of water that were about to dump all over the jungle above the cave. Limestone caves are carved by water. That's how they form in the first place. Water seeping through cracks in the rock over thousands and thousands of years. And when it rains hard above ground, all that water has to go somewhere. And where it goes is down through those same cracks, into the cave system below. The group had been underground for maybe an hour when their guide suddenly stopped talking. His head tilted to one side like he was listening to something, and he was. He was hearing something that made his blood run cold. The gentle dripping sound that's always present in caves, it was getting louder, much louder. And when you've been guiding cave tours for 10 years, you know exactly what that means. The guide's voice cut through the chamber as he shouts and instructs everyone to move to higher ground. But even as he said those words, everyone in the group could hear it. A distant rumbling sound, like thunder, but it wasn't coming from above. It was coming from deeper in the cave. The cave was flooding, and they were directly in the path of the water. Above ground, the storm had unleashed absolute hell. Rain was pounding the jungle with devastating force, turning every little stream into a raging torrent. And all that water was finding its way into the cave system, turning those beautiful underground pools into something deadly. The guide started yelling instructions, telling everyone to follow him toward a passage that led to higher chambers. But the cave was transforming right before their eyes. Water was pouring in from everywhere, not just dripping anymore, but flowing like rivers through passages that had been bone dry just minutes before. The limestone floors that had been easy to walk on were now slick as ice. The water was rising fast, and the current was getting stronger by the second. What had been a leisurely walk through a natural wonder was now a fight for survival, and that's when everything went horribly wrong. The guide was doing everything right. He was checking on each member of the group, making sure nobody got left behind as they struggled through the rising water. He reached back to help one of the Venezuelan tourists navigate a particularly treacherous section. But the cave floor was so slippery from all the water, and in that split second, his foot slipped. This man who had walked these passages thousands of times without incident. He fell hard, and his headlamp went flying, smashing against the cave wall. The current grabbed him immediately. The group didn't just watch helplessly, they tried to save him. People started forming a human chain, reaching out desperately as their guide managed to grab onto a rock in the rushing water. For a brief moment, it looked like they might actually be able to pull him back to safety. Someone's fingertips were just inches from his outstretched hand, but the rock was wet, and the current was relentless. His grip slipped, and in that instant, he was gone. And here's the thing that makes this so tragic. Even as the water was carrying him away into the darkness, he was still shouting instructions to the group, telling them which way to go, trying to save them, even as he was being swept to his death. And then, he was gone. 15 people were now trapped in a flooding cave with no guide, limited light, and no idea how to get out. The panic that set in at that moment must have been absolutely overwhelming. This man had been their lifeline, their hope of survival, and they had just watched the cave swallow him whole. Above ground, the local man who had waved at the group when they entered the cave grew worried. As the storm got worse and hours passed, he started getting a bad feeling. Tour groups usually came out within a few hours, but this one had been down there much longer than normal. Something wasn't right. He contacted emergency services, telling them he was worried about the tourists who had gone into the cave that morning. As soon as rescue teams received the call, they knew things were dire. Back inside the cave, the water kept rising. The sound was deafening. Not just the roar of the flood, but the entire cave system groaning under the pressure. In the chaos and the darkness, people were trying to remember which direction they had come from, trying to find any passage that might lead to safety. One of the tourists, the Canadian guy with the camera, started using his camera flash to light up their surroundings, trying to help everyone navigate. But the situation was getting worse by the minute. The water was now waist-deep in most places, and the current was strong enough to knock people off their feet. As they fought their way through the flooding passages, desperately trying to reach higher ground, 2 more people were claimed by the cave. A middle-aged man from Panama lost his footing in a section where the current was particularly vicious. As people reached out to try to help him, a young woman from Venezuela was also swept away. In a matter of minutes, they had gone from a group of 16 excited tourists to 13 terrified survivors, watching their companions disappear into the darkness. The remaining 13 somehow managed to keep going. They climbed over submerged rocks, pulled each other through flooded passages, and searched desperately for any route back to the surface. Their headlamp batteries were starting to die, which added another layer of terror to an already impossible situation. They spent hours in that cave, hours in freezing water, in almost complete darkness, not knowing if rescue was even possible. Above ground, emergency services knew they were down there, but the water pouring out of the cave entrance made it clear that getting to them was going to be extremely difficult. Eventually, the 13 survivors found their way to a higher chamber. They were exhausted, hypothermic, and traumatized beyond belief. Some of them were praying, others were just holding on to each other, trying to process what they had just lived through. When rescue teams finally reached them, it was like something out of a nightmare. These people had been to hell and back, watching 3 of their companions, including the man they trusted to keep them safe, get claimed by the very cave they had come to explore. They all emerged out of the cave alive. The guide's body was recovered the next day. This man who had dedicated his career to showing people the beauty of the underground world had died trying to save them. The 2 other victims were found as well. 3 people who had woken up that morning, expecting nothing more than an adventure, were gone, claimed by a force of nature that turned their underground paradise into a death trap in a matter of minutes. On June 30th, 2002, an 18-year-old recent high school graduate decided to straddle one of nature's most dangerous tourist attractions in Hawaii. The story then takes a terrifying turn. The Halana blowhole sits on the southeastern shore of Oahu, near Sandy Beach. It's one of Hawaii's most popular tourist attractions, and for good reason. This natural wonder was formed thousands of years ago, when massive lava flows created an intricate system of underwater caverns and tubes that connect directly to the ocean. When powerful Pacific waves crash into these submerged chambers, the water gets compressed and forced up through a narrow opening in the volcanic rock, creating a spectacular geyser that can shoot water 30 feet, 9 meters, into the air with tremendous force. Tourists come from all over the world to witness this incredible display of nature's power, and most of them are smart about it. They stand at the designated safe viewing area, take their photos, and enjoy the show from a respectful distance. But the thing about the Halana blowhole is that it's not just beautiful, it's incredibly dangerous. The hydraulic forces at play here are absolutely massive, and the timing is completely unpredictable. That's why there are multiple warning signs posted all around the area, written in several languages to make sure every tourist understands the danger. That's why there's a heavy-duty locked gate specifically installed to prevent people from accessing the most hazardous sections of the rock formation. That's why local authorities and park services have spent years and significant resources trying to keep tourists at a safe distance from this natural death trap. Because when things go wrong at the Halana blowhole, they go very, very wrong, and there's usually no second chance. Daniel Dick was 18 years old and had just graduated from First Lutheran High School in Los Angeles, where he had been student body president. By all accounts, he was one of those kids everyone loved, happy, entertaining, always trying to make people laugh and feel good about themselves. He was in Hawaii celebrating his graduation with his mother and 2 brothers, probably having the time of his life in what most people consider paradise on Earth. On this particular Sunday afternoon in late June, the weather was perfect: clear skies, warm temperatures, and moderate ocean conditions. Daniel made his way to the Halana blowhole, likely drawn by the same curiosity and sense of adventure that attracts thousands of visitors to this spot every year. But here's where the story takes a turn that's hard to understand, and frankly, hard to forgive. When Daniel arrived at the blowhole around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he didn't just observe it from the designated viewing area like every other responsible tourist. He saw the multiple warning signs posted all around the area, large, clearly visible signs in multiple languages that explicitly stated the life-threatening dangers of getting too close to the blowhole opening. He saw the heavy-duty locked gate that had been specifically installed by local authorities to prevent access to the most dangerous sections of the rock formation. And according to multiple witnesses who were there that day, people were actively shouting at him, telling him not to go where he was planning to go. But Daniel ignored absolutely all of it. Every safety measure, every warning, every person trying to help him make a better decision. He deliberately climbed over the locked gate, physically bypassing the barrier that was there for his own protection. He walked directly past the warning signs without so much as a pause. And despite multiple people in the area shouting at him to stop, pleading with him to reconsider, he made his way down to the actual opening of the blowhole itself, the most dangerous spot imaginable. We're talking about the exact hole in the volcanic rock where pressurized ocean water shoots up with incredible, unpredictable force. Now, you have to understand what the Halana blowhole actually is to grasp just how reckless this decision was. The pressure is enormous, the force is unpredictable, and the timing is completely random. You never know when the next blast of water is coming or how powerful it's going to be. At around 3:15 in the afternoon, with dozens of horrified tourists watching from the safe viewing area, Daniel was doing something that defies all logic and common sense. He was straddling the opening of the blowhole, standing with one foot planted on each side of the hole, directly over the spot where this massive hydraulic force erupts from the ocean below. Picture this scene: an 18-year-old kid, full of life and potential, positioning himself as a human bridge over one of nature's most violent and unpredictable phenomena. The tourists watching from the designated safe area must have been absolutely horrified. Here was this young man, completely exposed and vulnerable to one of the most powerful and random forces of nature, having ignored every possible safety measure that had been put in place to protect him. And then, in a split second that changed everything, it happened. A massive Pacific wave crashed into the underwater lava tube system with tremendous force, creating a pressure surge that had been building in the submerged caverns. A colossal plume of water exploded up through the blowhole opening with the force of a liquid rocket. Daniel was instantly blasted 3 to 5 feet, 1 to 1.5 meters into the air, his body completely at the mercy of this incredible hydraulic explosion that could have easily launched a car. But here's what makes this tragedy so horrific. As Daniel came back down, he didn't land safely on the rocks around the opening. He fell directly into the blowhole itself. The witnesses who saw this happen immediately started screaming for help. They called 911, and within minutes, rescue teams were on their way. But everyone who knew anything about the Halona blowhole understood that this was likely going to be a recovery operation, not a rescue. What happened to Daniel after he fell into that opening is almost too horrific to imagine. His body went straight down into the blowhole, pulled deeper by gravity into the underwater lava tube system. With massive surges of water shooting up and down through these tunnels, Daniel would have been tossed around like a rag doll, going up and down with each powerful blast, never getting a moment to catch his breath or find any way to save himself. The situation he found himself in was absolutely nightmarish. The Honolulu Fire Department immediately launched a comprehensive and desperate search operation. They deployed boats to scan the surrounding ocean waters, thinking the powerful currents might have somehow carried Daniel's body out into the open Pacific. They had Air 1 helicopter flying overhead in systematic search patterns, scanning the water from above, with trained spotters looking for any sign of him. They had experienced rescue divers preparing to enter the blowhole system itself, which is some of the most dangerous diving work imaginable due to the violent currents and zero visibility conditions. Captain Richard Sue, who was leading the rescue operation, knew they were working against time and incredible odds. The conditions were challenging, and rescue teams could only work in short intervals due to the dangerous currents. The search operation continued through the entire night and into Monday morning, with rescue teams working in dangerous conditions and rotating shifts. The ocean conditions were challenging. Choppy seas made boat operations difficult and hazardous, and the powerful, unpredictable currents around the blowhole meant that even the most experienced rescue divers could only work in very short intervals before having to surface for safety. On Monday morning at 10:15 a.m., divers finally located Daniel's body. And here's what's particularly tragic about where they found him. He was only about 20 feet, 6 meters, from the blowhole opening, floating on his back on the sandy bottom. The rescue teams believed that Daniel had been trapped underwater throughout Sunday night, and his body was only released when the tide changed on Monday morning. Captain Sue described finding him floating freely on the sandy bottom, which suggested that the currents had finally released him from whatever part of the cave system had held him overnight. Daniel's mother and 2 brothers were in Hawaii with him when this happened. They had come to paradise for what should have been a celebration of his high school graduation, and instead they were dealing with an unimaginable tragedy. They told fire officials they would be bringing his body back to Los Angeles for a private service. Some risks simply aren't worth taking. The warning signs and barriers aren't suggestions. They're the difference between going home with incredible memories and not going home at all. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is ignore the warnings that are specifically designed to keep you alive.